officially known as the Forbes Factor. What does that mean? Well, if you're listening live, it is a happy new year for us. It's our first show of the year, and I am so very excited to be here. There's a lot going on in the world, and we're not usually very topical because a lot of our content, as you guys know, if you're listening after the fact, is evergreen. But what's happening today as we're walking into this new year, I'm from California, and there's fires everywhere. And I just heard a very passionate James Woods, one of my favorite actors, talk about how his house is on fire and everything that he owns is in the room he's literally on television with at the moment, which is like a suitcase and his glasses. So my heart goes out to all my friends and families, just kind of devastating. And we here in the East Coast, in Florida, I just went through the devastating hurricanes and I lost my series of rental properties. And so I can empathize with what's going on. And then a couple of years ago, one of my dearest friends lived right in the path of the fires in the Pacific Palisades. And I'm just going to evoke his name, Scott, who I loved very, very much. And he stood his ground on his roof with his neighbors, valiantly fought the fires, and 3 weeks later was gone from an embolism. And I certainly miss him. And so all of that is bringing this emotion before I start today's show. I just wanted to share with you, the takeaway from that is to be grateful, is to, not to take any of this for granted. You have no ideas what's good, better, and different. The last thing that I just have to share, and God, I feel so maudlin, and I'm so sorry about this, but maybe it's touching a chord in somebody's heart. But tomorrow is the day 25 years ago that I lost my dad. And so January is always this interesting month. We all lead up to Happy New Year, happy, happy, happy. We'd yell at each other, you need to be happy. I'm like, I'm not so happy. But I am certainly happy. I'm happy anytime I get to communicate and talk with you guys, inspire, motivate, and get people to just maybe think about life a little differently. The big news for me as we're moving into 2025, I'm very big on picking a word. I'll share that with you guys as we start off this year. 2 years ago, my word of the year was implementation. And I'd started a new coaching company, now of which I've got 42,000 graduating students. But implementation meant that I worked very hard to create books and trainings and courses and download all the stuff that I've been working on for so many years. By the end of 2023, I was completely exhausted, and my new word was delegation and duplication, so I could have people help me. And I highly recommend that no matter how smart or wonderful you think you are, you deserve to have people around you help you get your message out, especially if you're an entrepreneur. And so many of my entrepreneurs out there, you are everything in your business, from the janitor to you make your own food to you do your own social media, and then you respond to you can only do so much. And I'm going to share with you, much like my guest who's coming up in just a few minutes, you've got something very special inside of you that you want to get out. It's why you're drawn to a show like this. It's why you're on the internet with social media and talking about your ideas. And you've lived a life. I'm going to share with you that wherever you are right now, you've got a story to tell, and I'm going to urge you to tell it. Coming up in 2025, my new word for this year is domination. I have managed to, in my life, play big, play small, have my past haunt my future, and for all the accolades and things that I've got, and there's certainly been a lot, and I appreciate all that I've done. I'm excited for all that I'm going to be doing, because I have a new sense, a renewed sense of who I am and what it takes to get here. And I talk to so many people, from high school students to seniors, who are always looking and wondering, how does other people do it? And I'm going to say, you know what? I would like you to start just figuring out how you do it. How did you get where you are? What strengths do you have? I talk to so many people who are very quick to put themselves down and shout that they're not enough and I don't deserve this and who am I? My whole year is going to be about letting all of that go, not only for me, but for everyone in my path, that we are so phenomenal as mothers, as stay-at-home moms who don't have a job, are like, wait a second, I look at all these glamorous people on all these magazine covers. What am I doing? I'm just raising kids. Congratulations that you're raising kids. Congratulations that you are maybe holding down a job and raising kids and a family and a relationship. Let's give ourselves a break. So domination may just be over your circumstances, that you don't let them control you, but that you step up and lean into what you are about. My guest today is very interesting. He is someone who is on the front lines of journalism. Journalism was something that I studied post-college. I didn't know that being a reporter was a job. We wanted to be a lawyer when I was in college, That's what I was supposed to be because I was smart in school. And if you didn't like blood and were going to be a doctor, you had to be a lawyer. There were very few choices. No one told me you could go into advertising and journalism. There were so many other jobs that you could do in your life. But I will share, because I was so frustrated about that, I became an actress so that I get to play journalists and I get to play news reporters and I get to play CEOs and people in outer space. I get to play a lot of things. I've been very blessed with that part of my career. And so I would like to bring my guest on today. Um, I'm excited to unpack why he did what he did. It's very radical the way he's lived his life, and maybe we'll find out how he's managed to play so big. Please welcome to the stage Richie McGinnis. Richie, come on up here, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
What'd you think of that intro? What's inspiring you from what I just said?
There's a lot of synchronicity in that intro. I literally watched that Woods clip right before I came on. And I think that's also what I touch on a lot in the book that I wrote, Riot Diet, which is, actually talking to the people who were affected by these American tragedies rather than just focusing on the commentators in the studios pontificating with their opinions, detached from the human suffering that's involved. And you also
Mm.
mentioned your father, and the beginning of the book covers me losing my father right as Trump took over in 2017
Oh,
with
wow.
and just running a news business through all that chaos, ending with the protests slash riots of 2020, and coming out of that chaos and making sense of it through the book and through the process of putting it out into the world. And the final note there is that I started my own publishing company because all of these big publishers, whether they're come on the left or the right, they were telling me I had to pick a side. And my story is the story of being stuck in between two brothers growing up, stuck in between the left and the right, working across the ideological spectrum in news in DC, and then stuck in between the protesters slash rioters and police. And I actually, during the course of this story, without spoilers, ended up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where I witnessed the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting. And my,
Well, you and I had talked about synchronicity because there's not a lot of people who witnessed that. I
Mhm.
have two stories that you don't know, and it's interesting that we're having this conversation. But one, I'm an eyewitness to the Las Vegas shooting. Everything that you
Wow.
see that's
Not
was
know that.
happening down below, I was recording on my phone. I literally stepped out on the balcony of the foundation room moments before we heard pop, 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 and thought it was fireworks. Was just taking photos, and turned the camera down to the bottom right, and there were people lying on the ground and running, and but you could barely see it. We were so high up. But all of that footage, and for the rest of that night, I played journalist
Wow.
because it's weird when you're in the middle of a tragedy, as you were as well. And I'm excited to hear that. I'm applauding you, one, for writing a book about it and getting it published, and then starting a company. Because one of the things I discovered in my publishing career is that legacy publishers were not doing it for me. I don't know. I don't want to say the day I walk in, well, it's at least a year and a half before your book is released. I'm like, guys, I can get
Exactly.
it turned around in 3 weeks and out there. I took my first book on home shopping, sold 10,000 copies in a day. I'm like, I don't need you guys. I appreciate that you have this machine, but I, that's a great conversation. And then the other tragedy that again, I've been a part of some really big ones and weird why I even know these things. But my personal one is that I raised a little boy in from South Central Los Angeles. He was part of the Big Brother, Little Brother program, lived with us, me and my ex-husband, for 12 years on and off, was best man at my wedding, was always there on my vacations. He was part of our lives. He was my son for all intents and purposes for 12 years. And then he was murdered walking home from a haircut to church. And my wedding photo, the picture of me and him and my ex, is on the cover of the LA Times. Not something you ever want to see.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
so I've never, written about that or made sense of that, but you did. So let's go back. Now that we've dumped all this beautiful, exciting new years on our audience. They're like, oh gosh. Let's go back to your beginnings. How did you get where you are?
Well, I grew up in the New York area. My mom was actually a working mom. She worked in Manhattan. My dad was an ER doctor slash orthopedic surgeon in Stamford, Connecticut. And I went to Georgetown in DC in 2008. And actually, I was close to New York during 9/11. My mom worked in the city, and I decided to study Arabic at Georgetown. So I studied Arabic and Middle Eastern history
Wait,
there.
wait, I'm sorry. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to study Arabic.
Yeah,
What does that
yeah.
mean?
Well, I did. I did on the morning of 9/11. I didn't know that that was going to lead me down that path. But
Oh,
9/11, 2001. Also, there's a personal tragedy aspect there, which I get into in the second book, which covers the MAGA side of the unrest. This covers BLM. But I found out that my mom had lung cancer on 9/11, 2001. So I
Oh,
went from thinking, is mom okay? She turned around on her way to the city, and my parents knew that she was going in on 9/12 for the surgery, and they planned to tell us on 9/11. And so that really like brought my personal world crashing down, but also the greater world that I understood growing up. So that really spurred me to want to study that region and uncover why things happen. But coming to DC in 2008 as an idealistic kid, I was knocking on doors for Obama in Virginia, and he had promised to pull all the troops out of the Middle East. So I thought I was going to be part of this whole new regime where everything about Americans' foreign policy was going to change. And I think over the course of my 16 years, almost 17 years in DC, I've learned to be more realistic about my expectations as far as what kind of change politicians can bring to our personal lives. But I think the book itself really gets into my personal story because it's more about tidying your own room before you can fix the whole country. And everybody who took to the streets had these lofty aspirations of really bringing some change. But ultimately, it has to come through ourselves, putting ourselves out into the culture and changing the culture before we can change our politics.
wow. We were certainly unpacking a lot right now. It's an interesting time too, because if you're listening to this live, it is January as the regime of, the administration is going to change. It's been a 4 year, it's been an interesting 8 years. I mean, it's been an interesting up and down. If you've lived long enough, every single administration seems to have their things. And I think what I resent most, I was a political scientist, and I've not put that to use, except that I choose not to want to vote anymore because it's so
Probably for
annoying.
the best, yeah.
Can't stand election years. It just messes with my whole mojo.
I hear that.
Um, but it has, because my very first voting booth we made, and I'm going to date myself, was in 1968. I was 8 years old, and it was Humphrey versus McGovern versus Nixon. Uh,
Wow.
and I made the voting booth with my dad. It was like, okay, you guys are 8 years old and we're voting. Um, and so it'll be interesting to see how this goes. I mean, I think one of the things that we all come to understand, I don't like the fact that as soon as somebody's in office, half the country hates them. I don't care what side it is. It just doesn't it feel like it gets old. And what is this thing? I mean, I know we're a two-party system, but literally 50% of the people are angry all the time. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter which side, which leads for a lot of unrest as a culture. Like, it's not like, I don't understand why we don't at some point, just like the publishers, choose a side. What the heck's that about? How
Mhm.
about we put somebody in office and we acquiesce that maybe not the perfect person? There's checks and balances in the Congress if you're smart about it. But could we just appreciate? There was a time when, you didn't want to say something. The president, whatever, whoever it is, lots of people sat in that seat. But there's a respect to that. I have a photo with, and again, I'm not taking either side here politically at all. I just want to let you guys know. I have a photo with Clinton. I don't care what you think about him. The photo is with the president, the sitting president of the United States. I thought that was pretty cool. Man, I got so much backlash
Wow.
as though I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I certainly have lived through plenty of that kind of backlash, just by virtue of going from, I started at Al Jazeera Arabic in DC, and then I went to MSNBC, NBC. Then I went to a conservative radio host, Mark Levin. I was a video editor on his online show, and then I took over the video operation at Daily Caller right when Trump took over, and that outlet was founded by Tucker Carlson in 2010. But Tucker, at the time that I took over, was effectively a backbencher at Fox. So I didn't know how the toothpaste was going to come out of the tube with Trump being, like you said, the hero to half of America and the enemy to the other half. Tucker very much embodied that in the media realm. And that happened when he took over the 8 p.m. slot right around when I started the job. So I had no idea how the toothpaste was going to come out of the tube, but certainly like with friends from home, their parents, during all the protests and riots, telling me their opinion on this or that. But really, uh, the core of my story is about my family and them keeping me together and keeping me from flying off the handle when I felt enraged about this outlet covered this way or that way. They were really my rock to keep me grounded and moored
Well,
and to make the right
so how do
decision.
you react to this statement? When Trump first started saying, and again, I had certain opinions about that man based on, he was a businessman. He had certain reputation, television host, which I did like him on The Apprentice.
Yeah.
And I didn't, however I felt about him. What, Oh, I was just going to ask. My question just disappeared in my head. That's so funny. I'm so excited about the question. You, I have no idea. All right, so let me ask you this about uh, Arabic.
Hmm.
What did you learn?
Oh, wow. That's a great question because I lived in the Middle East right before the Arab Spring. So I was there in the fall of 2010, and I traveled not only throughout the Arab Middle East, but also through Israel multiple times. And I go through that experience in the book because when I was living over there, I saw the way, George Bush had said this thing, bring democracy to the Middle East. And that sounds great in our American minds. We live in a land that is blessed with being a fresh land where people came for a new start. But there you see these tribal divisions, sectarian divisions, both within Islam, but more just tribal divisions that have existed for thousands of years, predating all of these religions even. And to see the way that society functions there. If you want to bring a democracy to a country, just look at the demographics of the different tribal groups like Iraq with the Kurds, the Shia Muslims, and the Sunni Muslims. You know exactly how that vote is going to go down. And so living over there, I thought that I wanted to help to fix that place, be part of this new approach there. And ultimately, through living there, I decided that I wanted to go back to America and help America because every single person that I talked to there, whether they were Israeli or Arab, I always ask, would you come to America if you could? And they'd say yes. I want a fresh start.
Mm,
And that resonated with me because I saw that on both in southern Lebanon from people who literally fought against the Israelis during the invasion in 2006. And then on the other side, with the Israeli family that I stayed with, the middle brother, I'm a middle brother as well, who fought in that same war in the special forces of the IDF. So seeing how blessed we were back here is really what brought me into American media. But I think the Arabic actually came a lot into play when I was covering whatever story, whether it was, the extremist right Proud Boys in Seattle or in Portland, where I covered a rally there, or if it was, the hard left out on the streets agitating police during the BLM stuff in Portland, for example, which was a spectacle into of itself. But you learn the language, you learn the culture, and you talk the talk, and that's how you gain the trust of these people to tell you what they really think about the situation and why they really think they're there. And so you just kind of have to more immerse yourself into the culture and understand where they're coming from in order to bring out that truth. And it's not, every reporter I think in the Trump era is like, thinks they have to inject their opinion into every story that they're covering. But our lane, my video team, when we were out there, was to record the video, ask people the questions that we think are relevant, and just state objectively they were wearing this, they said this, and not call them these pejorative names just to get more likes or retweets on these social media platforms, but just put
that
the
was
video out there and let the audience decide for themselves.
that was my question that I had spaced on for a moment, a little senior moment, had to do with when Trump first said this phrase "fake news."
Hmm.
I didn't like him.
Yeah.
I did never heard that before. I didn't comprehend what it could be. I do know there's this theory that, if you write it down, it must be true. All of a sudden you read things in the newspaper in print and it's true. And then of course, next day you read something's been retracted. It was never true in the first place.
Hmm.
What's your take on the phrase fake news?
Well, as all Trumpian uh, nicknames, or we could call it a nickname would be a light way of putting it. They're usually very simple, and using all caps as he does when he says fake news, makes it really like it sticks out and it's easy to remember, just like build the wall. So, that phraseology, I think it really doesn't, because I think ultimately when he's saying fake news, what he's really meaning is that any news who um, doesn't like him,
Well,
right?
no, see, I don't see. I didn't see it that way. What I saw and I'm going to interject my take on it. What I see of fake news is biased news.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's what you were talking about. So
yeah,
if you are
yeah,
biased,
yeah.
right or the left,
Mhm.
and you report, like you said, not the facts, but through your lens, the facts, that is in fact fake news.
Absolutely. Well, and that's, I think brings it full circle because now what we're looking at in 2024 with the way that the media landscape is structured after, like you said, these 8 years is that you have two echo chambers that are founded upon opinion and every situation that happens, whether it's the California wildfires that are taking place right now, or the shooting that I witnessed in Kenosha, or January 6th, which I also covered and was on the ground for and followed the rioters into the Capitol. All of these things are being interpreted through these two echo chambers. And so, in a lot of ways, I think both sides embody fake news as far as like every
Oh, yeah.
single situation is hyperbolized to either detract from the other side or to bolster your own side. And if you stand in between those two trenches, I can tell you from plenty of experience that you're going to get blasted. But I think ultimately, if you think of it in the longer trajectory, the internet is forever. And so, in the wake of the Trump era, what is going to be built from there?
Well,
And
I got to tell you, the fake news thing really hit home for me during COVID. All of a sudden, I'd never experienced in this particular country the idea of censorship.
mhm,
How do
absolutely,
you, especially when it comes to your health and there are facts that are provable. And now we've
totally,
lived long enough to see that, in fact, some things they were reporting were not real.
absolutely.
And
That,
I'm just sitting here kind of flabbergasted about how we're moving forward.
yeah, well, and that's covered in the book extensively because obviously all of this took place within the midst of the pandemic. So we're on these empty planes traveling across the country. And ultimately, the anger that we saw on both the political left and the political right was exacerbated enormously by not only the fact that these people were locked down in their homes and not permitted to go outside, although in the context of protests, as Bill de Blasio said in New York, that was the only way that you could go outside and actually see other people. And so that's all in addition to the fact that small businesses were shut down and that the media, everybody's sitting in their houses watching this apoplectic coverage of the death tolls and of the virus and all of the things that you have to do to avoid just go walking out in the streets and literally
Yeah,
dying and
I'm
breathing
gonna go
air.
out on a limb here. Do you think it was a social experiment? We all still have COVID, and people are not dropping dead like flies, and all the things that we were terrified of. And we were terrified, by the way, of something like Ebola, where you're
Mhm.
bleeding out of your eyes. And
Yeah.
we've all seen the movies, and I think that helped the terror. I remember, like, the first time I went out during the pandemic, going like wiping down the handle in the grocery stores. Don't touch anything because you're gonna die. And then you realize after the third time you've got COVID, you might not die. And so, what's your take on all of that?
Well, I think if you look back through American history, and that's why I include a lot of history of the places that I was visiting in the book. If you look backwards, I think you see that there's no, don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. And so when you have these, whether it was 9/11 with the Patriot Act, or whether it was the pandemic, that all of these fear-inducing high-impact moments in American history are then utilized by our politicians to capitalize on that fear and running a news outlet on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and all these social media platforms. What is apparent just after not only 5 years, but within 5 minutes is that if you want to succeed on these platforms, the hate click is what it's called, what we used to jokingly refer to it as. That's a much more powerful click. You're going to get a lot more clicks through a headline that induces hate than one that induces, coming together or anything that's kumbaya. So if it bleeds, it leads.
I know,
And
I remember that.
the media worked. The problem, I think, is that within the context of the Iraq war is the perfect example. You had both sides of the media saying support the troops. And if you questioned anything about the invasion of Iraq, then you weren't supporting the troops. So you were politically incorrect if you were questioning that the narratives that our intelligence agencies and our the people who are in charge of dropping the bombs were telling us one thing, but the responsibility of the media is then to question that. That's the fourth estate. They're supposed to hold the truth to power. And at the times when times are toughest, they ask the hard questions. And nobody, I mean, there were just a very small handful of people who questioned the WMD narrative. And everybody else just took it hook, line, and sinker as the facts, as the truth. Okay, Saddam Hussein has, nuclear weapons, and we're going to have to go stop him because he's partially responsible for 9/11, et cetera. We've learned that none of those things are true. in the aftermath. But when I rewind back to that moment, I remember my dad going through the channels on cable, and he's like, he was a doctor, so he's like, you see this? CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, everybody is supporting the war. And he's like, but guess what? Their kids aren't going over there. And I can tell you that when you see somebody maimed like that, it'll change you forever. And I didn't realize that I was going to witness something like that in 2020. But there's a big parallel between the pandemic and between 9/11, where everybody was afraid to go outside because they're going to get blown up by a terrorist. And it's like they're much better off looking both ways before they cross the street, because that's a much more dangerous thing than, as far as just like statistics go. So I think, we have a tendency to lose our faculties for reason in these moments of fear. And that's exactly when the media is supposed to not buy into it, but actually, make the hard questions. And
Is it because the media is owned by both of these sides?
well, I mean, have you ever watched Fox News or MSNBC? I mean, 90% of the ads that are on there are for
Oh, yeah.
drugs, for pharmaceuticals. And so, to bring that all back to the pandemic, I mean, I went to digital media thinking, okay, cable news, I'm working in a candle factory and electricity just got invented, and we're gonna have free speech on the internet and everything's gonna be great, and I'm gonna be part of that. Same as me studying Arabic, idealistic about it. But we would put up cable news clips of people like Tucker questioning the what was happening during the pandemic with what was being recommended as a remedy. And that cable news clip would then get us a strike on these social media
Oh,
platforms. So I'm
was it
like, wait, so
advertising
you
or
can say it
what?
on cable news. Yes, you can say it on cable news, but you can't on all of these social media platforms that effectively function as our town square now. And to see that was really eye-opening as far as the special interests that control not only within the Beltway, our political establishment, but also our media establishment and the platforms that, are based in places like Silicon Valley. Um, and the censorship that's coming from on those platforms is being written and enforced by people who are completely detached from, the small businesses that were being shut down and destroyed, and the little guy who's out in the street protesting.
What's your prognosis for all of this, having witnessed so much?
My prognosis is, I think, if you stand up uh, in the midst of all this and do maintain your faculties and do rely on your community, your family to be the people that you seek for approval, rather than this great big internet world where, I mean, you can read 2,000 positive comments and one that says something mean, and you're going to remember that one comment. So, if you're out there in the public sphere, especially for young kids, I coach the Georgetown hockey team, and I see this all the time. They're terrified of saying the wrong thing because real life has bled into digital life. And so, your digital identity is just as important, if not more important, than your real life one. But if you stand up for your values and what you hold to be true, and you try your best to make sense of this crazy world, then I think you will stand out amongst the rest in a long enough timeline. And so I just encourage people not to, just go in the direction that everybody else is because it'll get them more retweets. Because I think on a long enough timeline, that is not the winning strategy.
Well, I think it's not necessarily about the winning part, but it was about the whole canceling thing. There was a fear. I mean,
Oh
Roseanne
yeah, for
got
sure.
canceled from a show that's called Roseanne. You're like,
Oh
wait a
yeah.
second, anybody, what is the when did this happen? We cancel each other. We don't like you. I think I was brokenhearted as a political scientist. I love debating. I don't really care what side you're on. Congratulations, this is your point of view. Let's have a talk about it.
Yeah.
But somehow in the last 8 years, it was like I'm going to hear what you have to say, and boom, you're out of here because I don't like you. I'm going to kill you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did that become a thing that you can't debate? You can't have a different point of view.
It's like people have to avoid politics now, and it's because our politics and our culture have become so intertwined that people are like, I can't even share a dinner table with people who think differently than me politically. And that was not a thing. You're right. It's happened so quickly. And I graduated college in 2012, and I still am involved with I play Georgetown hockey as well. So I've been involved with that team over the course of this entire transformation, and to see the way in which college used to be a place for you to to say the wrong things so you could learn what the right thing was, to experiment um, just out in the world of your peers with these different ideas and wrestle with them and come to new conclusions. And people are so afraid of putting anything out there now, of saying the wrong thing, that it's like, how do you learn how to ride a bike if you're going to have training wheels on the whole time?
That is a great analogy. I find incredibly stifling and very sad. I remember reading the Constitution as part of my training. Something about that freedom of speech thing got
Yeah.
taken away, and just like you talked about in terms of the TSA and the Patriot Act, now you're allowed to pat me down everywhere in public, and I'm supposed to go, okay, I don't have a choice if I want to fly in your plane. And that water that I just bought that's that big, or the yogurt, you're going to throw it out
Yeah.
for no logical reason. I could taste it. You're going to throw it out. And I'm like, but it's all, they took our buildings down. Well, really? We seem to be giving up a lot of freedoms, and we seem to happily be doing that. Um,
Mhm.
to me, it's a very frightening time. But here's the thing too, it's never not been a frightening time. I wasn't around during World War One, two, Korean, the plagues of the great, whatever. It's always been challenging times.
Mhm.
Do you think, as a bit of a historian, that this is any different, worse, or just par for the course?
Well, I think the difference now is what we've been talking about is the digitization of our reality. And so the communities that people used to identify with, uh, like local news is gone. Our small towns are, being eroded and being urbanized. And so the small communities that people used to insulate themselves from the outside world, the national political stage, those are all gone. And so it's not a surprise that everybody identifies so voraciously for their political tribe.
Right.
And so I think the difference now is that we live in a world where you log on to Twitter and you can see every bad thing that's happened within the last 12 hours on video. And as graphic as it may be, just instantly, boom, it's right in front of your face. And so there's a desensitization to what's really happening in America and in the greater world because of the fact that we see it. It's not just violent movies anymore. It's like it's violence in real life.
And let's talk about how violent movies are. It becomes this insane
Oh, the
body count.
violence is obviously, yeah, gone through the roof. And
It has no limit to how much graphically we can see people's body parts being blown apart.
mhm,
And it seems to all be okay. And now the new thing is, because and I'm a woman and I'm going to continually fight for our sense of, being in the world. But apparently women can take punches from men like it's nothing and keep on going. As someone who got mugged and got punched, and I'm a martial artist, as a chick, I got to tell you, you get punched by a guy once, you are dead. I mean, it's challenging. The first time I ever got hit, I was like, I'd never felt anything like that in my entire life. So a little bit of a delusion thing. When you wrote your book, Riot Diet, where did the name come from?
that's so the actually the name originally was just America in Chaos, which I think,
Mm,
but like you said, America's been in chaos before. And I think that actually ties exactly into what we were just talking about. The riot diet was this joke that we had on the road. It was like all the restaurants were closed. The only thing you can get is fast food, and we were eating at all these really odd hours because, we're basically nocturnal. You go to the protest right before sundown, and then the people who are keen on agitating the police stick around, a smaller group of people, and they start banging in the fence, and you're going to bed at like 4 or 5 a.m. And I was still running my video team too, so I'd be waking up in the morning to for our morning video meetings. But it was like, you're running on no sleep. You have very limited options for food, and so you're just eating the crap that is open. And so that was the riot diet when we were out on the road. But then realizing it as I was writing the book, people were also consuming the riot diet, whether it was the Uber Eats that they were getting or the news feeds that they were going through. And so the entire country was consuming this riotous diet of fear, like we've been talking about. And it rhymes and it's catchy.
yes, it does.
My editor, Anthony Swafford, who's the author of Jarhead,
Oh,
Jake Gyllenhaal plays him in the movie.
yeah.
He was the one who I sent him a bunch of options for the title, and he was like, Riot Diet. I like that. And
Mm.
so that's just stuck, and we went with Riot Diet.
So, what's a conclusion that someone, when reading the book, takes away from it?
The conclusion is that even having gone through and witnessed and been going from the observer to the observed, it's still possible to reach out a hand. At the end of the first book, without giving too much away, I was basically thrown into the limelight because I witnessed this shooting Kyle Rittenhouse, the first man he shot, Joseph Rosenbaum, he shot right in front of me.
All
And
right, so
growing
wait, so you just happened to be there?
Well, I went to Kenosha because there was unrest based around a police involved shooting of Jacob Blake. And just like everything else at that time, there was a video that was taken out of context that didn't show he was tased twice before he was entering a vehicle. And it wasn't until the police reported that he was also armed with a knife. And the deeper story of Jacob Blake was turned into this caricature on both sides. So either he's this evil guy and he deserved what he got, or, he was just trying to get into the car with his kids and he was shot in front of his kids. Um, the same thing happened after so the unrest started. I traveled there with my team to cover it, and Kyle Rittenhouse was out there on the third night of rioting. And the previous night, we had seen the whole commercial district surrounding the courthouse where they were protesting literally burn. So we
Mm.
knew it was going to be a very dangerous night. And that previous night, I had seen a business burning. The cars outside were burning, and these guys were using pressure washers. So there's no fire department. We asked them, what are you guys doing there? You guys see the fire department out here? We're out here to put out the fires. And they returned with the pressure washers and buckets to put out these. So Kyle was in front of that same business the next day. And I saw these armed guys in front of the business, and I knew that was an extension of that story because now you had the volunteer police force. And so I interviewed Kyle 13 minutes before the shooting, and I
Oh my,
walked out with him into the riot where he had a med kit, and he's 17 years old. He's got a rifle, he's got a med kit, and so he's playing the role of volunteer policeman and EMT. And I asked him multiple ways, like, are you really an EMT? Like, you look pretty young. But he lied and told me he did. That all came out in court. But I ended up, this man, Joseph Rosenbaum, yelled, and I was on the phone with my coworker. I knew things were escalating. I was like, where are you? Shelby, she was a former pro tennis player, total, I don't know if I can swear, BA, a bad,
you can totally guess.
she's badass. And she's super tough no matter what the situation. So she was very calm on the phone. Oh, I'm right here. Oh yeah. And I heard Joseph Rosenbaum yell, and so I said, oh, something I won't say on air. I gotta go. And I thought I started recording with my phone, but I took a photo of the ground. So I ran behind Rosenbaum. Rittenhouse was running away, and he turned around, and I ended up in the crossfire. Rosenbaum lunged for the gun, and Rittenhouse dodged and shot. And he was shot 15 feet in front of me. And the first bullet went right past my legs. I told police when I was telling them what happened the night of that I looked down. So they made me both a victim and a witness in this case. And
Oh my God.
my dad being an ER doctor, I just, there's no thinking in those kinds of situations. I tried to save Joseph Rosenbaum, and I carried him to the hospital. He was pronounced dead within 15 minutes of being, when I dropped him on the gurney. But that whole experience is this tragic moment that then Kyle Rittenhouse was turned into a hero for half of America and a white supremacist for the other half of America. And Joseph Rosenbaum, who was killed, I didn't know, but he was convicted of multiple crimes, something that's not good, that involves, I don't even have to get into it with your viewers, but it involved minors. And many
Oh
of
my
the
God,
minors that he
really?
abused were in jail for the same crime now. And he was abused by his own stepfather. So, half of America said he was a martyr for the BLM cause, and the other half said he was a terrible person who deserved what he got. But I didn't know any of this at the time, so I couldn't just unpack that in my brain. But within that framework that was built around these two narratives, I was thrown into the middle as a witness and a victim, just stating my objective observations. And at the end of the story, I fight to correct the record. And I went on Tucker Carlson because they asked me to come on. He had the biggest audience, and I knew that I actually saw what happened. There was all this conjecture around it. So, and then CNN took my words out of context and basically said I supported the conservative claim that he acted in self-defense. I said I didn't support any claim. I just stated objective observations of why he said he was there and what I saw. And so they had me on to correct the record. So I think the takeaway of the book is that at the time that happened, I wanted to stamp my feet and go on Twitter and say CNN's terrible, all these things. But my family, my boss, Jeff Ingersoll, is a former Marine. They said, "Hey, calm down, go through the proper channels, and you can correct the record." And so ultimately, if you do reach out a hand rather than a backhanded slap, you can actually, I think, occupy both of these echo chambers and not have to just rely on the approval of one to get your point across.
Wow. Part of that story. Conclusion is that we are perpetrating a divisiveness to what end?
To the end of the business succeeding, and the business of media is relying upon eyeballs, and within the current environment that we are, you get those eyeballs if you tell people what they want to hear. So I don't know if I have a solution for the way out beyond each individual person focusing
Does
more on
your same,
what's that?
having seen what you've seen, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, um, does it reflect back on the George Floyd case for you?
Definitely, that's what kicked everything off. And I think similarly with what happened to George Floyd, which is an objectively terrible, terrible thing, was hyperbolized, and it was the same thing that he was either an evil man who deserved what he got, according to half of America, and according to the other half,
Allow,
he, sorry, say that again.
on a, we haven't had any problems with the first 47 minutes of our broadcast. All of a sudden now it's been kind of wonky. Are you okay?
Yeah, I can
Jordan,
hear
are
you now.
you hearing this okay? All right, cool. Because Richie is frozen for me.
Yeah, you broke up for me for a second there, but
I'm
I can
not quite
now.
sure. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on.
Can
I
you hear me now?
normally have no problems whatsoever, and today all of a sudden, yeah, you're a little wonky. Where are you located? You're in DC at the moment.
Yeah, I have good internet here. I can try. I have another
All right,
source.
so this is, certainly opens up. What advice, what thoughts would you give for America?
The advice that I would give is focus more on your community and your
Mm,
immediate family, and the stuff that's happening at the national level is going to impact your daily life. But what's more important are the people that surround you. And ultimately, if you're throwing all of your energy into either Orange Man bad or Orange Man great, then that's going to have a negative impact on yourself and on the people around you. And just know that, as you'll learn in the book, it's the politicians out there are playing it like it's a game, and it's a dirty game. And real life is a lot different than the world that you see on Twitter. So just know when you're going into your news feed, take it all with a grain of salt, and focus on, I'm a hockey player. Like, my hockey team is my immediate family, just as much as my best friends in DC, and then my family up in New York. Those are the people that I talk to, and those are the people that I rely on for input on what I should do next.
Are you married? Kids?
I'm married. Yeah, I just she just turned one, my kid, and that is in the second book. So the first book doesn't have the love story, but the second book covers the MAGA side of the unrest. So that begins with, let's see, I went to a Proud Boys rally in September, and then I went to the border. I went to Rudy Giuliani's apartment to pick up the Hunter Biden laptop. I was covered the election, stopped the Steal 1, 2 in DC, and then January 6th. And the reason why it's a sequel is because it's the same story told on two different sides of the political spectrum. How people grew to distrust the people enforcing the institutions that they think are supposed to keep them safe, keep their election safe, et cetera. And in the first book, I talk a lot about my dad, but my mom, she's the one who kept us together after my dad passed away. And so, in the midst of all this tragedy after Kenosha and leading up to January 6th, my mom was the one who kept our family together while all this chaos was going on. And through that, I also met my wife. So the readers will have to tune in to the second book to get that story. But yep, I am married now, and we did have a beautiful baby girl. So that'll come in the next one, and you can get caught up. There's plenty to read in the meantime, but I'm done with that book, and it'll be coming out within the next couple months.
Yeah. And so who's going to play you in the movie?
Well, Anthony Swafford, the author of Jarhead, did suggest writing a movie, and that's that's a good question. During the trial, people called
Oh,
me.
come on, seriously. The whole you
Well,
put yourself in the middle of things that don't. I mean,
people called me. They called me.
I don't.
There's the Lincoln lawyer, Matthew McConaughey. So I was in the courtroom, and it was
Yep.
televised, and so they were calling me the Ford Fiesta lawyer, like a poor man's Matthew McConaughey.
All
He's
right, that
obviously not my
works.
age, and he's definitely better looking, but I don't know who it would be.
But it's interesting because before meeting you, I'm one of the only people I know who's been involved in more than one national tragedy and in a variety of different ways, including 9/11. My brother-in-law was a firefighter,
Wow.
and he was the only guy who survived because his entire firehouse went when the second building was coming down. Before it came
Wow.
down,
We're like
they were
Forrest Gump.
there. Yeah, yeah. So, and then I put him on tour. We actually on 11/11 got him and four of the guys on their bicycles, sorry, to ride across country to say thank you to all the firemen and all the things that happened across a 33-day riding their bicycles across the country to say thank you to all the firefighters. But to have known everybody in his firehouse, because I would stay there overnight. They did 24-hour shifts, and then go to see the memorial of the first responders, and all of their names are sadly engraved there. You're like, I don't want to be this close to things that are this national. But you, my friend, you're like ahead of the pack in a weird way. Um, and whoever gets to play you will be quite an honor because I think you've seen a lot.
We'll see. We'll see
Um,
one day at a
what,
time.
so I've got two 22-year-olds who apparently now have their own opinion about life and politics, and we don't agree, which is very frustrating. And I also want to say, look, I've been around 3 times as long as you have. I have a lot more reason to be right, whatever that means. And they're like, no, we're little young Democrats. I mean, because I remember what is the difference between the old definition between a Republican and Democrat, which no longer is real, but it used to be that everybody's Democrat, Republicans are Democrats with money. You're like, all right, now things have changed. And I think it's fascinating to have lived long enough as a poli sci major to watch people like a Tulsi Gabbard or a Kennedy
Yeah.
support a Republic. You're like, what's going on here?
And then all the neocons supporting the other side. It's 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 crazy. And yeah, that's the point, is we're in the midst of shifting paradigm, and the definition, these boxes that everybody wants to put everyone in. Oh, you're this or you're that. Those are all changing. And so, yeah, I think people, like, I was pro free speech and anti-war, and that made me anti-Bush. And that, I guess, I don't
Right.
know, that's not a left-wing position, certainly, at least explicitly anymore. So it's definitely changing. And I coach 22-year-olds, and I see it as well. It's, um, people are both, they're very keen to voice their opinions to their parents and to their people they know think the same way they do. Um, I find
Yes.
the best way to talk with the younger generation, because I do think ultimately, if you guide them through questions, through a Socratic dialogue, then you're able to, get them to come to at least a more nuanced conclusion. So my my kid doesn't even talk yet, so I can't give any advice about as far as the parenting side. But
I can hardly wait.
from a coaching perspective, I'm just like, oh, so why do you think that? Oh, so where did that come from? Oh, so do you know about this other time that this happened? And this isn't the first paradigm shift that we've come through in America, and we've been through quite a few, at least three or four. And so, yeah, you can look back in the rear view to learn about
So,
how to
as a
do
writer,
it.
as a journalist, real quick, what's your take on AI?
Oh boy.
And we've only got 2 minutes, 3 minutes left, but
Yeah,
I'm just
my
curious about the whole
website
AI thing.
actually
What's your
says that we don't use AI in our writing, because I think it's also like it's contributing to this hive mind, which is you have people in Silicon Valley writing the algorithms for these AI bots, and you can already see. I mean, there's so many different instances of them being biased, and it's just like, if you're going to have them write, even just help you interpret a certain event from history, when they're boiling it down, it's coming through the lens of those same people who are running the social media platforms that I generated content on. And I'm like, I go to the Library of Congress right over here,
but
and I
it's
read.
coming, and I see robots.
Yeah. And so I
Oh
think
well, the fact that you
tainted-
don't use AI, you may be the only person left.
Yeah, you can't change a printed book. And so I'm in the business right now of printing books, and I'd rather use my own mind as many times as I might have hit my head. It's still going to use it.
I love that. We've got 2 minutes. I've got a lot of people who've been watching. Darlene is like, what a story. Hello, Richie. How fantastic. Thank you guys so very much. And I appreciate all that. We've got a minute left for you to just give your hope for the world, if you would, please.
I think there's a lot of hope, and I think you have to go into the belly of the beast before you can come out with something that's valuable. And I think that's we're in the midst of that right now. But it is, I think, the difficulty with our discourse right now is bringing forth a lot of important questions in maybe a way that's tough right now. But if you look on the longer timeline, I think, 10 years from now, we'll be in a better place because of this chaotic moment that we're facing right now. And being within the midst of the belly of the beast myself, I think, I've come out with a much better understanding and a much more stable understanding of what's going on as a result.
I think my audience is adoring you. How do they find out where to reach you?
At Richie McGinnis, RichieMcGinniss, on all social media platforms, and pigeonpress.com. And you can submit your own proposal there. We do pulp nonfiction, so you can go
Oh,
ahead and reach
I love
out.
that. All right. Well, I'm excited 10 years from now to talk to your daughter, as my kids will be in their
Yes,
30s.
there we
Have
go.
phone to see if you still have the same kind of opinions. This has been a fascinating conversation, guys, here on the Forbes Factor. We got to go. And I appreciate everyone tuning in today. Thank you so very much. If you like the show, share it with your friends as people who need to hear this and be inspired as you are today. Richie, until next time we meet, I will see you soon, my friend. Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me.